see is just kids handing in work without really being their best work. They're just, I've written a story, here you go, done. Although we constantly talk about all the little steps along the way about how to check your work, how to make sure it's, we have the detailed, how do we make it more detailed and juicy words, and however we want to describe things, they weren't getting there. So we decided we'd start out with the very basic checklist first. And on the very basic checklist, it was just basically, capital letters at the start of every sentence. If you capitalize I, if you use it, capitalize any name, use question marks, exclamation marks when needed, apostrophes, and even gave a sample though, it's the dog's collar or the pet's leash, versus if we were doing contractions. Also talking about no apostrophes if we have something like the cats came home, things like that. Yes, it's saying cats, but there's no that kind of thing. Sentiment, and then also the other one was recognizing that's not starting every sentence exactly the same. Like how we see, and then also that none of their sentence starts are with and, then, but, or, because, or so. So then they would have that checklist, understanding it, and we didn't want it to. And where we discussed is we didn't want this to start out with, let's create a brand new writing assignment. Let's go back. You pick whatever one you want, all right? Or you could make it more meaningful to something that they were doing in the process. So with my class, basically they did that. Then they would go to a friend when they felt they had it, stapled on their phase one, as we called it. And then the person who was reviewing it would circle all the capital letters and punctuations, or where they need to be but are missing. Because then that identifies that student who's understanding what should be there, which I'll show you something in a sec. Then they needed to box the first word of every sentence and then put an X through if they use one of those like one of those sentence starters, and, then, but, or, because. So when you go through this, like the individual only has even from the feedback piece, they clearly didn't. And so that's where I guess one of the struggles came from running through this already once, was individuals not reading what is required of them. So from the writer themselves to the person who's actually trying to provide, and like even said, and Tasha and I were talking and kind of stemmed, is I know it's being postponed to next staff meeting, is even the common language. So I put this down as the friendly feedback, but there isn't really feedback here. This is just proof. This is just proofreading or editing. So I think this is going to be called the friendly editing process. That's kind of, I'm already there. So that would be the first phase. And then the next one here is one of the things we've been doing. So that's number one. Number two is, how do we make it more descriptive? And so then we talked about adjective and adverbs. And then so we got into automatopoeias, alliterations, similes, and personification. Those are outcome pieces for us in grade 4. Obviously grade 5, there would be probably a few more. And there's one here that isn't there, and I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but that's fine. Then we went to phase 3, and on phase 3 was kind of the 5 W's, and that's where they need to be able to get in the explanation and the motivation behind what the purpose of that writing was, so in a story. So then we went through the scaffolding process of what lessons we've taught and different things, even using, like right now we're reading the novel Finders Keepers, and in Finders Keepers they have the main character goes into these daydreams and elaborate daydreams. So then we were trying to use those even mini paragraphs to help the students understand how vivid those daydreams are and how well the author uses that piece of literature to kind of frame where we're going. But even then, as we know, that doesn't necessarily work. Then everyday work has strong, complete sentences. So it's not just the idea that we only write good sentences for our stories or a thesis, but it's an everyday work. Because one of the things with our 4 camps assignments, we're finding just like, like one-word answers, not a sentence. So it's kind of trying to just keep doing that. Then we called it our recipe of things for the 5 W's. So then we provided, and I'll put this on another screen, we wrote our own paragraph to see whether or not the kids, so we could model what's being, and I know one of the things we kind of talked about is if we show an example of a bad paragraph versus a good paragraph, sometimes kids don't really, like I just found kids, they'll still just write a bad paragraph. Right? Like they go, okay, fine, that seems like it's good enough because that we've just said that's a D or something. And they're like, oh, I'm good with these. And then you get the bad one. So I'll just blow that up because I have it in a. And what I did is every time I used this exact same paragraph, I used it against the checklist I would teach them. So one of the things we were, to model how my friend would do feedback, I, kind of said, well, here's a paragraph that my friend came to me. I'm going to make sure and I follow through. So then I used, the smart pens, and I did what that example was. So we wanted them to be able to show them and model a couple of things. And so in here, we talked about alliteration. We had alliteration. We had personification. We had automatopoeias. We had different sentence starters, and when we talked about our different sentence starters, we're trying to give the example of the subject, ly words starting a sentence, very short sentences, so right here, like just bark, so the kids can get that modeling part. And so we went through this process, and then so I can kind of just show you some of the different ones that we have here. Want to kind of look at some of them. I'll just hand out different ones. And so it went, the color that are on the sheets, we went, pink was the very first one, white, there's I knew I had it, my agenda for today, I'm losing my mind, I cannot find it. And then I had it. So even here you'll see this one was white, pink, white, green. So I color coordinated it to them, that way the kids knew all the steps that they were going through as well. Get that one actually done. So I guess that where it kind of led me to was now that we have this and we get to the final phase. So I have one more, I have a green one here. Like even this one here, the one student even wrote on the very top, why? So it'll be kind of interesting just to see where that gets to. But now from a grade 4 lens, or even asking Paul and Allison, I'll throw you guys on now, is like, so from when you guys, like, what do you guys want? And I guess ultimately that's one of the things that I want from this process is, so when the students leave here in grade 4 and go to grade 5, what is the next phase that you guys would really like them, to see and have happen? And is this process, is it too, I don't even know if it, is this process even working? So like, from our district standpoint, we use the assessment practice of, we're using the FAIR acronym. So that the way the kids understand that, so we talked about that language. And So we've kind of done it one time through. So we've done all these things, but the biggest things, even if you look at those samplings, you'll notice that the kids not necessarily maybe have a good understanding of adjective and adverbs, because not completely have they used their red pencil crayon and done that. They're not necessarily even 100% boxing in any of these items, underlining strong verbs, what those mean. Even though on the criteria checklist we've given them, we've given descriptions of what those things would be. No?
Can I just?
Yeah.
Mine, I'm a little bit behind in the process, but what I'm noticing is I had 2 pair up the other day that were done first, so strong kids, and they went through the process right well, but when you have those weaker students that don't know what an adjective is, and then they're also working with a weaker student or with a stronger, it becomes lopsided. And like the process can work, but there's a lot of fine tuning.
I'm also wondering if that would be a source of a lot of agitation for a child as well that thinks they've done a really good job and fulfilled this.
Yes.
And then the weaker student is the assessor, and how that could cause problems between the two even. Because let's say they box something and the one student's like, why are you boxing that? That shouldn't be boxed. You know, like, so it would be interesting, right? But yeah, I guess that's where you're matching carefully, but yet what do you do with those 2 weak ones?
And I can honestly say, I haven't strategically matched.
No, I haven't either, but
Right.
I'm just
No.
noticing and I'm
Yeah.
behind you, so any insight you have would.
But it's also a timing thing too that really
Yeah.
becomes a struggle, because we're doing centers, and this is one of my centers. So that group of 5 kids, they're together, and of course they, even though they already had their writing done, when they go back to do the editing phase, so when you go through phase 1 and then you take whatever notes you have, and then now you have phase 2 and you get the white piece of paper. Now you're gonna go through and make sure that you have all your LY words, you know, your adjective, adverbs, and all that. And then you're gonna add what you need to do there to make it better. And then you go to your buddy doing it again for you. Obviously that process really slows down again. And so some kids who have it, and even, I didn't explain this, but all the kids have a writing reference guidebook. And in the writing reference guidebook, I guess when here, like for kids who don't have a vocabulary base, so instead of using emotion words and feeling words, instead of saying happy, you could say blessed, or you could be using blissful, you know, like all these different ways.
Right.
So they have this skill, like this tool for them, but they don't necessarily always use these. Like instead of having our word walls and all that, we've given it, we talked about our sentence starters. We have all the examples of sentence starters for them. And I guess that's where we're finding is you're giving all these kids all the tools to make the work better, but they're not necessarily taking that intrinsic piece. So then how do I, then that's where it kind of, I'm to that roadblock is, so if we've spent a week editing one piece going through 4 phases.
Yeah, it should be proficient.
Really everyone should be able to get to a proficient level, because we've taught all these little mini lessons. And even down here, we actually went through lesson plans. So we kind of went through and we had this one little video we showed the kid about Kathy and this fishing story. So she's an author and she goes through and tells the whole story. So we watched it, we filled out like the beginning, middle, end. We did the whole who's the main character, what was the problem, and so the kids all know those type of pieces, which they've all heard before. Then we went from the backwards by design, so filling out the whole story plan after watching it, and then like choosing one draft, going through, and I guess that's where we're kind of we talked about the little mini lessons of all these things that we're doing, like using picture prompts, and how can we describe how can we make that picture sound better by adding adjectives, like. So we've done some of these things, but it's still, I feel we've done all these things, but now what? And I guess that's where I'm gonna kind of hit my roadblock, because there's a part of me that wants to go, like, I feel like I would be evaluating harder because we've done so many steps, but is that necessarily right either?
Well, and you run the risk, like, I mean, with my grade sixers, I just gave them a whole spiel because they did a big project and hardly